Exactly 30 years ago, on August 24th, 1995, Microsoft unveiled Windows 95 to the world and permanently changed the desktop computer industry. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the fine details and whatnot, because that's been done by countless other people, and they're a lot smarter than I am with this stuff. I want to give you a sort of introduction, a sort of overview, if you will, of Windows 95, my experiences with it, what it was like to use it 30 years ago, and have some fun actually using Windows 95 30 years after its launch. Before I talk about Windows 95 in depth, though, I just want to give a little bit of context as to what the computer industry looked like around the time Windows 95 released. By 1995, the technological industry had seen amazing growth since the dawn of personal computing sometime in the late 70s. You had the Apple IIs and the Commodores and whatnot, and that turned into the 286, 386, eventually 486 machines that you saw a lot in the 1990s. And all you need to know about those numbers is that they got progressively more powerful. You don't need to know exactly what those numbers mean, because there's a reason behind it, but don't worry about it, not for this video. So the thing is, computing had been developing for a long time, and there was a problem with the personal computer industry in the fact that computers were still very, very inaccessible, and they were still dominated by traditional marketing tactics of the time, where it was very low-scale marketing, often in specialty stores, often toy stores, and the accessibility of these machines was heavily compromised. It was not easy to use these computers at all. There was no such thing as an easy-use PC, if you know what I mean. And this was a problem because the computer industry was developing so quickly, and people didn't know how to properly take advantage of their machines. I also would like to say, too, that the computers that I'm talking about here are mind-bogglingly primitive as compared to today's machines. For one thing, they were almost entirely offline. There was no internet. Okay, well, there was internet. Internet existed by 1995, of course, but it wasn't at all what we're thinking of today. It was purely hypertext and emails, you know, more or less plain text documents and some images at most. It wasn't anything remotely complicated. File sharing was a thing, but that was done through FTP. It was just super, super primitive. It was also very expensive, very sort of centralized too. There wasn't the international network that we're thinking of today. It's not like where people in India connecting to the internet. That's not what existed in 95. It was all basically in the United States, and it was also in Europe, but it wasn't everywhere, and it was expensive, and it was dominated by three or so, a handful of internet service providers. There wasn't much variety in terms of who you got actually providing your internet. So it was really centralized too, albeit not heavily regulated, but centralized nonetheless. Another thing I wanted to talk about too is the type of technology you would see in computers at the time. The technology of computers, it had been advancing. So by 1995, you had stuff like CD-ROM drives, and you had the 3.5-inch high-capacity floppy drives, where you had these new storage mediums. But the CDs that they had back then, the CD-ROM drives, they were not reliable at all. They were actually very prone to breaking. They were single speed, they were slow, they were prone to breaking. They were really expensive too, and not everyone had CD-ROM drives. Most people by 1995 did, I'm pretty sure. But they were just generally clunky. They required extra cards and whatnot. Again, this stuff in its absolute infancy. So you only really saw CD-ROM drives whenever it came to like video games and full motion video, things that required high capacity storage. It's the only time you ever really saw them, because most people just used analog mediums like the floppy disk. That was much more convenient and cheaper. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about too, is that all media, all things on a computer were transmitted through disk. There was no, obviously, I was just talking about file transfer on the internet, and some people had that, but 99% of the population was going to be transmitting everything through a disk. So that meant you were stuck with 1.44 megabyte floppy disks. You were stuck with whatever that could give you, which was not much. I mean, back then it was a lot more, considering that file space was, more precious, and therefore files were smaller, but it still wasn't a whole lot. So the point is that it's not a lot of space at all. So it's not what you're thinking. Computers were also very, very, very expensive at the time, and they were almost preventatively priced. I mean, what were we talking about here? 1995. So you'd be having a 486, 46 DX2, like a very standard processor. Again, don't worry about what the numbers mean. Just know that this is what I'm describing here is a very mid-range, very average computer for 1995. It's not complicated. A lot of people would have had this. So you're dealing with 486 DX2. You got 8 megabytes of RAM. You got probably like a 1 megabyte video card, and maybe like a sound card, like a 16-bit, a Sound Blaster 16, something like that. You'd be dealing with that kind of sound. And yeah, that computer, coupled with a hard disk and a CD-ROM drive and whatnot, that computer would probably cost you upwards of $2,000 in 1995, which, adjusted for inflation, would be about $4,236 today, I'm pretty sure, something like that. And just put that in perspective, this is my truck. This is a 1997 Nissan Hardbody that I got a couple months ago. That truck was $4,200 exactly, just a couple months ago. So, quite literally, these computers were the price of a used car back then and now. The relationship, too, between the user and the computer was very different. See, back then, you were dealing with a level of ineptitude that is hard to even comprehend today with a computer. This isn't grandma struggling to understand what link to open. This is grandma not knowing what a mouse is, or what a keyboard is, or what the keys are, and what that means. I mean, you're dealing with a lot of people who've never used a computer, who've never had and have never had any family members with computers, or the only computers that they ever did see were toy machines from the 80s, the Commodore and the Ataris and whatnot. They weren't used to computers as a professional thing that had to be used. And as well, it was, these computers at the time did a very, very poor job of communicating how to use them to people. So you had a whole industry, I mean an industry, of tutorial tapes. I mean, I'm talking 900, over 1,000 page books that you would buy after you get your computer to, you were expected to read this and learn how to use your computer, using these books. And these were just things that you had at the time. Tutorial tapes. They were computer classes for adults, not for children, for adults. You would go to a computer class and learn how to use PCs at the time because they were so inaccessible. It was a real problem, and that was one of the things that Windows 95 really tried to address, was the crippling accessibility issue, because it really hurt everybody. So most of the people who were buying computers in 1995 and whatnot, they were using like office software, home finance applications and whatnot. You would have things like Lotus, the Lotus Smart Suite, or Lotus 123 and whatnot. The spreadsheet programs. If you don't know what that is, spreadsheets, word processing. You had obviously Microsoft Office. That was a real popular thing at the time. Actually, Microsoft Office had just become the most popular Office suite by that point, I'm pretty sure. You had stuff like that. That was what people were buying computers for. They were buying computers for just very practical use. So it was not what we're thinking, like in terms of games and whatnot. Of course, people bought games, and kids had games. But nostalgia porn tends to shield the reality of the situation, which was that the majority of people who were getting these computers were not using them for anything fun, nor are they using them for anything exciting, like full motion video and stuff like that. That was not even really a concern of the majority of people that were getting computers in 1994 and 5. They were getting computers because I don't know, they needed to calculate their home finances, or they needed help doing their taxes or something, or like it was stuff like that. It was record keeping. It was not glamorous at all. I do want to say too that there were a lot of graphical operating systems before Windows 95. Windows 95 was not the first to come up with the intuitive graphical operating system. I mean, hell, there were different versions of Windows before Windows 95, but even way before that, I mean, you had systems like GEOS for the Commodore 64. You had, and that also later came out on IBM PCs. You had the TOS for the Atari ST, so the Atari ST's operating system. You had the Amiga Workbench, which was, and these were all mouse-driven, mind you. So these were not like graphic operating systems. They actually used a mouse, a 2-button mouse often. And then even before all of them, you had the Mac OS. You had Macintosh, which that goes all the way back to 1984. And technically, because it came from the Lisa's operating system, it actually goes back all the way to 1983 when they were first doing experiments with graphical operating systems. And then, of course, you had the earlier versions of Windows. You had Windows 1, 2, 3, 3.1, not counting NT. So, Windows was a pre-established brand before 95, obviously. So there were plenty of experiments to make the computer easier to use. It's just Windows 95 was a lot more effective at what it did. So at the time, most people would be using DOS. I say most people. I don't know about by 1994 or 5. Maybe most people had a graphical operating system. But from what I understand, most people in the early 90s would have been using a DOS prompt, which what that is just a monochrome screen, black, blue, whatever backgrounds with white text, and there you go. You're given a keyboard and asked to type stuff in. You had to know the commands. You had to know what you were doing. It wasn't intuitive at all. There were tons of books and programs and tutorials and everything you could imagine telling you how to use DOS, and of course every program had different commands that you had to learn. So, DOS was a whole thing in its own right. But that was what most people were acquainted with. So whenever Windows 95 came around, there were a lot of people who that's all they knew for a computer. So whenever they saw the advancement of 95, it was crazy. So now that you can kind of see what the computer industry looked like around 1995 and the kind of hurdles that people were having to deal with, I think it's about time that we actually start up the old computer, turn things on, and take a look at Windows 95 and see what it did and see what it looked like, and of course have some fun with it 30 years later. Alright, so this is the computer that I'm going to be using for this. This is a Packard Bell Multimedia M415. It's from 1997, so a couple years after Windows 95 came out, but it's, it'll do the job, it'll do the trick. It's perfectly compatible. It's shipped with Windows 95. This particular variant has been upgraded to 48 megabytes of RAM. It's got a Sound Blaster AW64 value in it. It has a Pentium 166 megahertz Pentium MMX, which all you need to know about that is that it has the multimedia codecs and whatnot for full motion video and multimedia sound and whatnot. Just the multimedia stuff that was obviously so popular in the 90s. Just note that the MMX Pentiums did not exist at the time of Windows 95's release, so this particular machine wouldn't have been really possible at the time. The CD-ROM drive is different. It should be the same speed though. I can almost guarantee you that. Like, I'm pretty sure it's about 16 speed. I'm pretty sure. But anyway, yeah, that's the system that we're going to be using. So enough rambling. Let's get it all out of the way and let's use Windows 95 30 years later. All right, so here it is. This is the computer. This is what I'm going to be using. So let's turn it on and watch it go. The monitor on. I don't know how well the monitor is actually going to show up on camera. I really hope it looks okay. These old cameras, they have problems with the refresh rate. So I don't know if you might see black lines. I'm sorry. So here it is. This is Windows 95. This is what will greet you whenever you first start up the operating system. And obviously you got this little welcome window here. You don't have to do this. You can turn it off. I just kind of like it because it's nice. But yeah, it gives you little tips and it gives you a tour. This was all new stuff back then. Like Windows 3 and the previous version of Windows did not have Windows Tour. They obviously didn't have online registration or anything like that. So you can just click through tips and whatnot. But let's just close it out. It'll be fine. So here you go. This is it. This is what you get whenever you turn it on. So you got your desktop. It's a teal, a classic teal. You got your My Computer. You got your network. Just very basic icons. This one would not have been here at launch, nor would this one. But we'll get to that in a moment. Neither would this one, and neither would this one actually. So these right here, once selected, would not have been on the desktop at launch, but it's besides the point. Let's just get to what we see. So you have your mouse right here. You're using the mouse control. Not revolutionary at the time, but still people were getting used to it. You have your time down here, and you hover over it. You got the date, and click on it. Click on it. I said you click on it. There you go, and you got a double click. I forgot that, and you get your date and time and whatnot. Got your clock, so that kind of replaces the old clock program. I should also mention what this is down here. This gray bar, this is the task bar, and this was a new idea. This was a new thing with Windows 95, where if you open a program, and any program, let's just open some stuff. I'll get to what this is in a minute. So open any program. Used to, there was no way to tell what programs were open. So for example, if you had this full screen, which most programs in the old days were, if you had this open, you would close Calculator, but you'd have no idea that Calculator was actually still running. It would still be running in the background, but you have no idea. Well, this taskbar tells you that Calculator is still running, and then it also shows whenever you maximize and minimize it, so you can make it available or unavailable at will. Revolutionary idea at the time. And so let's get to what this was. What did I just click on over here? This is the most important thing that Windows 95 introduced in all of these features. This is really what put Windows 95 on the map. This is what made it the big deal, the start button. And the start button was a totally new thing. The idea that you could click a single button and then all of your programs, your settings, everything that you wanted to use and needed to do with your computer would be right here, easy to access, easy to use. There was nothing like this, before the start button. You had stuff like in Mac, you had the Finder and whatnot, but nothing like this. Not a single button. That was all in menus at the top of the screen. That it worked very differently than this. But Windows 95 had a dedicated start button where you could do anything. You could run let's just do Explorer. You could run programs directly from the run command, and you had all of your installed programs, especially if you told it to anyway. You could put it in your start menu. A lot of stuff. And yeah, I should also say too, like, these wouldn't be here. Obviously, these are all programs that I installed. The only things that would really be here would be you'd have like Paint. So, if I open that up, you have your paint program, classic, whatever. You have that, and then you would have your calculator or your solitaire. You'd have some games if you chose to install games. That is, games didn't necessarily come pre-installed. And let's just show one of the other cool features about Windows 95 too. Is, well, as you can see, if I can type, and let's make that bigger so that way y'all can read it. You probably still won't be able to, but still. Oh, I can't make it bigger. Not in this version. Anyway, so as you can see, one of the things that made Windows 95 so remarkable was the multitasking. It's the fact that you could flip between programs like this. Now, obviously, there were other multitasking operating systems. You had Mac OS, you had Amiga, but still, multitasking for PC users for the longest time was not easy. It was not intuitive at all. Multitasking machines, DOS had no multitasking whatsoever. So if you were jumping from DOS to Windows 95, like a lot of people did, you wouldn't know what that is. So a lot of new features introduced with Windows 95 that just made things so much more convenient and simple. Now, I want to get to some things too. So what I was saying before about this, the internet and Microsoft Network and stuff, so these are things that were not in Windows 95 at launch. So, at launch, what you would get is, this is the box. This is the box right here. This is the original version of Windows 95 that you would find in store shelves at launch. Actually, no, this is not the original because I had the Internet Explorer starter code. Whatever. So the original one wouldn't have this. Pretend that doesn't exist, and this would be, what you got. So with that version of Windows, there was no Internet Explorer. In fact, there was no internet functionality at all. It was a completely offline operating system. There was no other features it didn't have. Like, for example, if I go here and go to the screensavers, here you have some of the classics like 3D Maze, or if I get out of that and I go to 3D Pipes. These screensavers did not ship with Windows 95. They came later. These are all just added things that they added in later revisions of Windows 95, and then Internet Explorer came with the Microsoft Plus pack for Windows 95. This was a big deal. So you might be wondering to yourself, well, how in the world did people have Internet Explorer? How did so many people get online, in the 90s, even though Windows 95 didn't ship with Internet Explorer? Well, it's actually really simple. Computer manufacturers in the 90s, they would often bundle various software packages with their computer, and one of the most popular packages that they would bundle was the Microsoft Plus pack. So if you bought a Windows 95 computer in 1995, you were most likely not getting a vanilla 95 experience. You were most likely getting something added on like the Plus pack, or even more so, you would be getting OEM bloatware garbage that they would add onto the system. It was actually very uncommon, unless you installed Windows yourself. It was typically pretty uncommon to actually have a fully vanilla Windows 95 experience like this. Even Packard Bell, with their system, they would have had the Packard Bell Navigator and stuff like that, and there'd be all kinds of, it looked like a house on the screen. It wouldn't be this, so that would be the kind of thing you're dealing with at the time. And the term bloatware didn't exist, but it would very quickly become a term, and it would be used a lot. Another thing you might notice too, and something that's a pretty important detail, is that Windows keys did not exist at the time, especially not whenever Windows 95 came out, of course, because the start button was a new thing. So they wouldn't know to make Windows keys for keyboards. That wouldn't come until later. And of course, by the time this Packard Bell computer came out, they would have been shipping computers with Windows keys, but this is just the computer that I have because the keyboard that I have. I like it and I use it for this system. But it's funny, even in this state, even in the way Windows 95 looks in this, it's downright quaint
how simple things are. I mean, just for example, there's no separate documents folder, not unless you make one. I think it might have one, but everything is immediately dropped into the C drive. There's no separating things into folders. It's just dropped bare onto the hard drive. And it's just super, super simple. I mean, there's nothing crazy going on here. And, I mean, if you want something like Task Manager, for example, it's still Control-Delete. But this is it. This is your Task Manager. In fact, yeah, you can't even move it. There's no moving in Task Manager. And it just shows you the task. It doesn't show you anything like that. If you want to actually see any information about what's, really going on, I think it has, System Monitor. And this is how you would actually check what in the world is even happening with your system. So it would show your processor usage. And, I mean, right now I'm not using anything. I just have Explorer open. But this would be how you see what's going on. So, yeah, very primitive. So the funny thing is, despite the fact that I'm only 21 years old, I actually have a bit of history with Windows 95. My first computer, my first 95 computer, was from years ago. It's from when I was like about 12 years old. It was an old Packard Bell, similar to this one, that I found outside of my papa's shop. It was sitting outside, and it had been out there in hurricanes and ice storms. Like, it had been out there for at least 10, 15 years just sitting, and I mean bare ass naked. I mean, there were no side panels. I mean, it was as exposed as you could get. You had no side panels. You had the top panel, and you had the bottom. And actually, no, you didn't even have a bottom panel because the bottom panels were attached to the side. So it was just completely bare. It was a bare motherboard, more or less. I was sitting inside of like the chassis, and I brought it home with two other computers. And of the two computers, the other two computers had their full cases, but the Packard Bell without its case is the only one that's still powered on. And, there's an example of screensaver there. So, that was another thing that I failed to mention. Yeah, Windows 95 came bundled with screensavers. The former versions of Windows did not. You had to buy those separately. You would buy screensaver packages. But anyway, so... yeah, the Packard Bell that I had back in the day, it literally had leaves dangling off the motherboard. It was so bad. And I couldn't get any programs on. I had no idea anything about computers really at the time. I'd only been fiddling with computers for a little bit by that point. I had used Windows 95 before in virtual machines, but only like passingly. It wasn't really a thing that I did often. I mainly used like 98 and XP and stuff when I was playing with virtual machines. And the Packard Bell, the only program that I had on it that I even remotely cared about was Wolfenstein 3D. This was actually on the computer. Obviously, it wasn't on. They didn't install it through CD at the time. It would have been installed through floppy. But that was the only program that I even could remotely play any game that I had on it. So I played it quite a bit. I mean, that was how I got through most of Wolfenstein 3D was on that computer. Then, of course, I broke it like an idiot because I'm 12 years old and I had no idea what I was doing with computers. I was trying to change the CMOS battery, and, well, you give a 12-year-old some tweezers and tell him to fix a computer, what do you think's going to happen? It happens like that. So that's what I was dealing with there. So it messed up on me, but. And I didn't get back into Windows 95 until much later. I got back into it about, when I was like 18 or so. I mean, obviously disposable income will do that to you. So I got back into it, and I got an IBM Aptiva, an Aptiva 2161, and that was also from 97, and I used that for a little bit. It's actually where the hard drive for this computer came from, and the CD-ROM drive. That both came from the Aptiva, but it had stability problems, and that's one of the things I want to talk about too with Windows 95. This thing, it will piss you off. I am telling you, it will piss you off. What I should say about this setup right here, what I have before you, this whole thing, this is about as ideal. Oh yeah, you can see the IBM badge. This is about the ideal scenario for Windows 95. I mean, you can't hardly get more perfect for the operating system than what I have here. This is, it's all period correct stuff. It's all the correct hardware, all the correct drivers, it's everything. This is not easy to get. It took me years to get this set up the way it is because this stuff is stupid expensive and hard to come by and unstable when you do come by it. And the thing is, Windows 95 is very, very finicky. It's very particular about the drivers, very particular about the software, and if you get one thing wrong, you'll just run into problems. And there's some computers it just doesn't like. It just will not like. It is stubborn like that. It will not work for certain computers just because it will not. And I've run into that on multiple occasions. The IBM Aptiva was a perfect example of that, where I had a computer that it would not work. One example of one of the things that happened with the Aptiva is that I constantly ran into sound driver issues because it had this really crappy Crystal sound card or whatever, some off-brand cheap rip-off of like a Sound Blaster. I don't know. I think it was ripping off the Sound Blaster 16. But the drivers are terrible, and it would never work right. And what would happen is that every time the computer would blue screen, which is very often because Windows 95 just doesn't work right, every time the computer would blue screen, it would inexplicably delete the audio driver. I mean, gone. Poof, like the wind, like it never existed. And I would sometimes have to reinstall Windows to get it to work. So if you're going to use Windows 95 back then and now, you need to have your box on hand. You need to have your disks. You need to have things ready. You need to make sure that you can reinstall this operating system and back everything up. Do not keep anything permanently on this system because it will break on you. I've run into that so much with this thing, and for how much fun you can actually have on Windows 95, it is a finicky, buggy, unstable mess. Alright, I know what y'all all want to see. Y'all want to see the cool thing. So, here's the thing, right? Windows 95 had a pretty good library of games. Now, obviously not all of these were for Windows 95. So, you get stuff like Quake, or, like Doom, or Duke Nukem. Those weren't specifically made for Windows 95. But the rest of these games, you can generally tell which ones were made for Windows 95, judging by, whoops, if I can find one, there you go, by the ones that have that little badge right there. So those games don't have to run in DOS. So let me give some context here. So Windows 95, it was a really powerful, gaming machine, even at its release, even without DirectX, which didn't come until later. DirectX, for context, is Microsoft's software gaming protocol that helps games run better and directly communicate with the hardware in Windows. So that didn't exist when Windows 95 launched. So a lot of games just simply ran in DOS. So like Doom, for example. I mean, that came out in '93 anyway, but that would have run in DOS mode. Same with Jazz Jackrabbit. Same with Quake. Same with Duke Nukem 3D. Even though those all came out at a time when, at least this version of Jazz Jackrabbit came out at a time when Windows 95 existed. However, later on, Mad Dog McCree is included in that too. But then you started having games that were able to take advantage of Windows 95 technology and able to take advantage of DirectX and whatnot. Obviously, when DirectX came out. So that's when you get games like Earthworm Jim, Monster Truck Madness, Flight Simulator, Daytona USA, Gex, MechWarrior 2, Return of Arcade, Age of Empires, Claw. You get all those, Diablo. So you get those coming out that can take advantage of Windows 95 and run natively in the operating system. And this is the genesis of sorts of the Windows becoming the gaming operating system. This is where it all started right here, was Windows 95 tailoring at least part of its market, other than the productivity market. They started actually paying attention to games. It had built-in support for various joysticks and gamepads and whatnot. So they were taking gaming a lot more seriously. And what you see before you, these are a lot of people's memories of Windows 95. Not even really the operating system itself, but just what they were playing and what they were using on the operating system at that time. This represents a lot of what people did. So, myself included. Of course, there were other bits of software that were important too. So, a couple of the ones I want to talk about, other than games, had Microsoft Office. This was one of the most important pieces of software that you had for Windows 95. By this time, Microsoft Office would have absolutely, if I can find it. So this is Microsoft Word. It doesn't have a folder. I forgot it doesn't. But this would have been a lot of the reason why people use Windows 95. So, I mean, just being able to use this functionality in a more convenient way, because Microsoft Office on Windows 3 is about the most painful thing you could ever imagine. So, this is a lot easier to use. So, hope you can read that. I don't know how good that's going to look on this, but there you go. You should be able to read that. Anyway, so had that. You also had something interesting too. Encarta 95. This is also pretty important. So this was an entire encyclopedia, but on a CD-ROM. So it's physically stored, physical information. Keep in mind that a regular encyclopedia at the time of, whatnot. Make sure this will go. Keep in mind that a regular encyclopedia at this time, would have been something like the World Book. It would have been this massive collection of books. This encyclopedia, in fact, we're going to pop it in. Shouldn't sit here and talk about it. I should just show it to you, shouldn't I?
Let there be justice for all. Let there be peace for all. And one small step for man.
So this is it. This is Encarta, as you can see, and normally to get an encyclopedia of this scale, it would just be a ridiculous amount of money, even at the time, and there would be it'd be impossible to store anywhere. So, but this, I mean, let's find some stuff. So let's just look up, I don't know, my home state. Let's go to, what do I search? I forget how to use this. So let's just search South Carolina. So here we go. And we got a whole page on South Carolina. You get pictures, so here's Table Rock. So you get pictures of it all. You get the Blue Ridge Mountains some more. Not showing any of the low country, okay. Oh, there we go, okay. You got interactive charts. This is stuff that obviously you wouldn't be able to do with a World Book. You'd have just like a little snippet of information most likely. And, I'm sure if you had a World Book it was fine. But, again, this is all interactive. There's a picture of Charleston. So yeah, you got that. And as well, it has sound effects and it has video too, so I'm hoping I can get some video. I don't think I'll get any video with South Carolina, but one thing I can also do is if I go to the Civil War, close that out. There you go, you actually get an animated timeline of battles as they occurred, and it tells you the date of the battle, and now you can drag through however you want to. You can pause it, stop it, whatnot. Again, stuff you would not be able to do with a regular encyclopedia. This is all on a single disc that you could buy. I mean, it probably wasn't cheap. I mean, you're talking probably 50, 60, maybe even more dollars in 1995 money. But if you consider the amount of information that you get on that single disc, it's absolutely incredible, and it's not like anything that really existed before. So it's a super neat thing. So I guess I'll show you what I'm talking about whenever it comes to like DOS compatibility and stuff too, what I was touching on when I was talking about the games. So if I go into Doom, for example, notice how it pulls up the DOS prompt and whatnot. Turn that down. So this would have been mostly how you would have played games. Turn that down somewhere. This would have been mostly how you played games on Windows 95. You would mostly have DOS games that you already own, and you would play them. I don't know how well the sounds come up on camera, sorry. You mostly just play games through DOS mode, pre-existing DOS games that you already owned. I don't know how I got stuck on him. And Windows 95 was great at that. I mean, it literally ran DOS right in the operating system. So if I exit this game right now, if I exit Doom, it'll immediately just kick me back to Windows 95. It made it super convenient. No, don't full screen that. But then, of course, you had games that could run natively on Windows 95, especially when DirectX came out. And to show you one of those, and actually hook up the controller. Uh-oh, bump the camera, no! Alright, so now I'm going to show you a game that runs natively under Windows 95. So this is Earthworm Jim. This would have come out, there you go, designed for Windows 95. So this would have come out, around the time Windows 95 released shortly after. This game is actually from 1995. So wake up. So now let's play some Earthworm Jim. I will warn you, I'm not good at this game. I actually only played it twice. I played it on the Super Nintendo and I played it on this, I think, once. So, you get to laugh at me all you want to. You can already see some of that full motion video going on here. I can turn it up a little bit. Yeah, that's fine. Oh well. Get the mouse cursor out of there. But as you can see, this is running directly in Windows 95, so there's nothing, crap. Oh, crap, I forgot. Don't jump there. But yeah, so you can see I'm using the gamepad right here. This is all, if I use mouse cursor, I can go right down here. So it's all still running. And it's running natively with support in Windows 95. That was a pretty new thing. Generally with Windows 3.1, you had dedicated 3.1 games that would run. But nothing like that. The 3.1 games were so basic, they were 16 colors only. And it would eat up all your computer's resources, whereas that, as you could see, it was doing it flawlessly. It didn't have any problem at all. Now, of course, it's almost impossible to talk about Windows 95 without at least talking once about the internet. So, I have the internet installed, I have Internet Explorer and whatnot. So, yes, Windows 95, the internet was a very big deal. It was a lot of the reason why people bought Windows 95. Even if they didn't have, let's go to just the ProtoWeb website. Get into that in a minute. But, a lot of people bought Windows 95 specifically for internet usage. They bought it to use Internet Explorer. The whole thing was, it was promoted to Kingdom Come, right? So, you can still use, as you see, you can actually still use Windows 95 online. Of course, I'm using the ProtoWeb service. These dudes they're doing the Lord's work here, keeping this stuff alive. And you have to jump your browser through a couple hoops through the proxies, and you got to have a broadband adapter. Technically you don't have to if you're one of the 5 people in America that still has broadband, but for most regular individuals, you need a broadband adapter. But it gives you a good idea, at least, of kind of what it looked like back then, what the internet felt like, and you can kind of see just what things were. This is what websites looked like, and of course you have of the Sega website a really bad clip of the Sega screen, and yeah, it's like a nice little window in time. But this is what people were excited for with the internet in 1995, 96, and whatnot. This is what people were looking forward to. What you're seeing here is probably the reason why some kid wanted to get a computer, was so he could go onto this exact website and go to Sega Spotlight. Probably not, I don't know, but it was a thing back then, and the internet was super crazy. You had people buying packages. In fact, I'm crazy enough that I have one. Netscape Navigator. This was the other option of browser that you had back in the day, other than Internet Explorer. So if I open up that real quick. So this was Netscape Navigator. And this is 3.0. This isn't the first one that we got. There were versions for Windows 3 as well. Keep that in mind. But it's the same thing. So if I go to pioneer.com, it should connect. Yeah, it was just, you had the internet. It was a big deal. It was, remember this, it was a big deal. And it was a fun thing at the time. And a lot of people were excited for it. So that's, what all of this is. And they made later versions of Windows 95 that had more online features that were bundled into the system. Things that you didn't have to get separately or through separate packages and whatnot. They just came with the computer and you were ready to log on and go online,
So here's the thing, I could go on for hours about Windows 95. I mean, it's really deserving of like a 3-part long Return of the King length documentary, there's so much to say. I haven't touched any on the blockbuster scale marketing that it had, or the freaking antitrust that came afterwards with the whole, the legal problems of Microsoft owning 60% of the market or whatever. And then you had the Rolling Stones song, the Start Me Up, the Start Me Up. You had all that going on. You had the Jay Leno presentation. You had the Microsoft Chicago and the beta builds and, all that stuff. What was that about? Weird, pre-release versions of Windows 95. Weird abortions of operating systems, that just never saw the light of day. I could go on forever about this stuff, but that was not the point of this video. Never the point of this video. The point of this was just really to give a good old toast to what really was one of the most innovative systems of all time. Happy 30th birthday, Windows 95. And I can guarantee you that come the next 30 years, we're still going to be talking about you.